Learning from history. Now, I am not a history buff, but I have been an English teacher for 30 years. And when you teach things like American Lit, or really any type of literature, I believe that you have to learn the history, the historical context of the pieces of literature that you teach. So that has led me to learn a lot about the periods of history that I did teach. And I see that some people who are coming up with political agendas like Project 2025, some people like J.D. Vance that want to take away no-fault divorce, they may not have really looked at history, because we know that no-fault divorce didn't always exist. And we know, if you have studied history, prior to no-fault divorce existing, people who found out that their female relatives were being abused, some of them looked the other way, but some of them took action, very violent, decisive, action that led to some of those abusers being run out of town, some of those abusers being injured for life, some of those abusers being unalived. That was the way that things happened in the past. So not having no-fault divorce did not mean that every woman silently dealt with abuse. And there were also women who grew certain plants in their gardens because those plants were able to be put into teas and food and take care of that person permanently as well. Now, going further into Project 2025, it's not just about taking away no-fault divorce. There's a lot of things that they want to take away. And they basically want to eliminate all the progress of the last 90 years, the Civil Rights Act, women's rights, women's suffrage. So there's just a whole long list of things. But let's go to the civil rights aspect for a minute. The historical time period that comes to my mind when I think about people trying to roll back the gains that minorities had achieved is the period right after the Civil War. So we had the Civil War, where, of course, the South seceded because they wanted to keep their slaves. It wasn't about states' rights. That was kind of a very minor issue. It was about keeping slaves, and they lost the battle. And then the North came down, and you had the period of Reconstruction. And during that time, you had blacks gain a lot of political, economic, social power. They took over some businesses. They were elected into office. They gained land and property. So they gained educational access. So there were so many changes that happened, right? Now, when the Northerners left, that's when you had the Southerners say, okay, we're going to roll back and take away all of these rights that were given to these black people. We're going to create slavery 2.0, basically. And so they came up with what a lot of people call Jim Crow laws, segregation, and they took away all of the progress that was made. But see, the thing is, there's a quote that says, a mind that has once been stretched never goes back to its previous format. its previous boundaries, its previous limitations, right? So in the mind of those Southerners, they thought, we say all of this progress is over. We say we're going back to as close as we can to slavery. What they did not expect was any kind of pushback. And the pushback that happened was the Great Migration. During the Great Migration, half of Black America, which was almost all in the southern states. You had very few Blacks prior to the Great Migration in the northern states. So the majority of the Blacks were in the southern states. So half of Black America left the South and went north. It's estimated that 6 million Black Americans left the South and went north. And the Southerners, if you look at paintings done that were chronologing this time, you see that crops and industries that had been fueled by Black labor suddenly came to a halt. There weren't enough workers to harvest the crops. So the crops were rotting in the fields. The crops were being scorched in the fields. The crops were dying in the fields. And all of the other jobs that were being done, mostly by Blacks, there weren't enough white people who knew how to do those jobs to do them. And there weren't enough Black people left to do them. So the economy of the South was impacted severely, to the point where there were law enforcement that was put at all kinds of ports and places of travel to basically prevent Blacks from leaving the South, which of course they weren't they weren't successful, but they tried. And when Blacks got to the North, you know what happened? They innovated. There was an explosion of culture. We got the Harlem Renaissance from the Great Migration. And then fast forward a couple of decades, those same Blacks that had been living up north came back with the Civil Rights Movement. So try to take power away from people. They don't have to sit there and put up with you taking it away. They can find ways to get around what you do. They can find ways